Before you cut that clematis down to the ground, before you pull it out, and before you tell yourself it's finished, I need you to stop for 1 second. Because that dry, brittle, brown-looking vine climbing your fence or trellis may not be dead at all. In fact, this is exactly where most gardeners get clematis wrong. They look at what's happening above the soil, they see nothing but lifeless stems, and they assume the whole plant is gone. But clematis has a habit that tricks people every single year. It can look completely finished on top while still holding a living, recoverable heart underneath. And if the roots and crown are still alive, what looks like a lost plant can turn into fresh green shoots and blooms again far faster than you think. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to figure out whether your clematis is truly dead or just stalled, stressed, or sleeping. Then I'm going to give you 5 natural fertilizers that work fast, not because they're magic, but because they give the plant exactly what it needs in a form it can actually use. No expensive rescue products, no mystery powders, no wasting money on things your plant can't absorb. Just straightforward, natural feeds that can wake up the roots, strengthen new growth, and push that clematis back toward blooming again. And stay with me, because the 5th fertilizer is the one most gardeners never think to use on a struggling clematis. It doesn't just feed the plant, it helps signal the plant to grow. That's why it can create the kind of comeback that makes people swear their vine came back from the dead overnight. Now, before we feed anything, we need to answer the one question that matters. Is your clematis actually dead? Here's the truth. With clematis, dead-looking top growth is not the same thing as a dead plant. Cold damage, drought stress, pruning mistakes, fungal wilt, transplant shock, and even delayed spring wake-up can all leave you with stems that look awful. Brown, dry, crispy, sometimes blackened, sometimes hollow. Sometimes every inch above the soil looks like it belongs in the compost pile. But the crown, the root system, and those lower buds near the base can still be alive and waiting. That's why experienced gardeners don't start by yanking it out. They start by checking for life in the right place. Go to the base of the plant, where the stems meet the soil. Find one of the thicker lower stems and gently scratch the outer surface with your fingernail, not high up where the damage is worst. Low down, close to the crown. If you see green underneath, that stem is still alive. If it looks brown, dry, and flaky all the way through, move lower and try again. Sometimes the top half is gone, but the bottom is still living. If the stem snaps cleanly like dry straw, that section is finished. But that still does not mean the whole plant is gone. Now move the mulch back carefully and check around the crown. You're looking for firm tissue, not mushy collapse. You're looking for tiny buds, swelling nodes, pale shoots, reddish points, or anything that feels alive and solid. Clematis often reemerges from low buds or directly from the crown when older stems fail, and that's the detail that saves plants. Not the old vine, the living base. If you find even one healthy bud, one green scratch, one firm section near the crown, your clematis is not a lost cause. It is a rescue project. And now comes the part most people rush and get wrong. Don't start feeding a stressed plant randomly. Feed with intention. A struggling clematis does not need a flood of harsh nitrogen. It does not need 10 products at once. It needs support. It needs easy absorption. It needs roots that can function again. It needs nutrients in the right balance. And it needs a little encouragement to switch from survival mode back into growth mode. So let's get into the 5 natural fertilizers that can do exactly that. The first one is compost tea. And if your clematis looks weak, stalled, or exhausted, this is one of the gentlest and smartest ways to start. A lot of people underestimate compost tea because it doesn't sound dramatic. It sounds simple. But that's exactly why it works so well in recovery. When you make a light compost tea from mature, finished compost, what you're giving the plant is not just a little nutrition. You're giving the root zone a boost of microbial life and a mild, plant-friendly feed that improves nutrient availability without shocking the roots. And that matters because a stressed clematis often struggles less from a total lack of nutrients and more from an inability to access what's already in the soil. Think about it like this. If the soil food web around the roots is tired, compacted, dry, or unbalanced, your plant can sit there surrounded by nutrients and still act hungry. Compost tea helps wake the soil back up. It nudges the underground system into working again. To make it, take a shovel or 2 of mature compost, put it into a bucket of water, stir it well, and let it steep. Some gardeners strain it, some don't. Either way, what you want is a mild brown liquid, not something thick and sludgy. Water it around the base of the clematis into already moist soil so the roots can take advantage of it immediately. What I like about compost tea as a first move is that it's forgiving. It helps a weak plant without pushing it too hard. It's the kind of feed you use when you're trying to rebuild strength from the bottom up. And here's something else most people miss. A clematis that has been sitting in tired soil often doesn't need a dramatic rescue first. It needs a stable foundation first. Compost tea does that. Now the second natural fertilizer is one that gets talked about for tomatoes all the time, but it can be incredibly useful here too when used the right way. I'm talking about comfrey tea. Comfrey is one of those plants gardeners either ignore or become obsessed with, and once you understand why, it makes sense. Its roots pull minerals up from deep in the soil, and its leaves can be turned into a nutrient-rich liquid feed that is especially valued for supporting flowering and strong growth. For clematis, that matters because once your plant begins to recover, you don't just want leaves. You want vigor, you want strong stems, you want buds, you want bloom energy. That's where comfrey shines. A clematis that's trying to come back from stress needs two phases of help. First, it needs life. Then it needs momentum. Comfrey tea helps with that second phase beautifully. It supports the plant as it moves from survival into active growth, and if your clematis is alive but weak, with thin stems and poor flowering performance, this is one of the most useful natural feeds you can give it. To make it, pack a bucket with comfrey leaves, add water, weigh the leaves down, and let the whole thing steep until you get a dark liquid. Yes, it smells strong, very strong. But what comes out of that bucket is concentrated, and once it's diluted, it becomes a powerful root zone feed. You don't pour it on full strength. You dilute it well and water it around the base of the plant. What makes this especially effective is that it's a liquid. Liquids move faster. When a plant is struggling, you usually don't want to wait forever for buried scraps or slow amendments to break down. You want something available sooner. That's why this kind of feeding feels so much more responsive. And one more thing. Don't confuse fast with aggressive. The goal is not to force your clematis into wild, soft growth that collapses later. The goal is to supply useful nutrition in a form the plant can actually absorb while it's rebuilding. Comfrey does that remarkably well. Now, before I give you number 3, let me point out the mistake that quietly keeps a lot of clematis from recovering. People feed the plant, but they never correct the soil conditions around it. And if the soil chemistry is working against you, your plant can stay stuck. That brings us to fertilizer number 3, wood ash, used carefully. This is the one that needs the most restraint, but when it fits the situation, it can make a real difference. Clematis generally performs best in soil that is not overly acidic. If the soil has drifted too sour over time, the plant can become less vigorous, less willing to flower, and more prone to looking miserable for no obvious reason. That's one reason older gardeners used to talk about sweetening the soil for clematis. Clean wood ash from untreated wood contains useful minerals and can help raise soil pH. It also contributes potassium. In other words, it can help correct two issues at once in the right setting. But this is where you need to be sensible. More is not better. A little is plenty. Too much can swing the soil the other way and create new problems. So if your clematis is planted in ground that tends acidic, and you know you haven't added anything to balance that in a long time, a light dusting of clean wood ash around the root zone can be helpful. Not touching the stems, not piled on the crown. Just a small amount scattered around the surrounding soil and watered in. Why can this work so well? Because a plant that is technically being fed can still underperform if the root environment is wrong. Think of wood ash not as a main meal, but as a correction. It creates a more favorable setting for your plant to use what it's already being given. And if you've ever had a clematis that simply sulked year after year, barely moved, barely bloomed, and never looked fully happy, this kind of subtle soil correction is often the hidden missing piece. Now the fourth one is where things get really interesting, because this is the emergency green-up fix that helps when the plant is alive, but simply cannot power itself properly. I'm talking about Epsom salt, used only when the symptoms actually point in that direction. This is important because Epsom salt is one of those things people throw at every plant for every problem. That's not how you use it well. You use it when the plant is showing signs that suggest a magnesium issue, especially yellowing between the veins while the veins themselves remain greener. When that happens, the plant can struggle to maintain healthy green growth, and recovery becomes slower because the photosynthetic engine is underperforming. Magnesium matters because it plays a central role in chlorophyll production, and chlorophyll is how the plant captures energy. So if your clematis is pale, weak, and struggling to green up, correcting a magnesium shortage can be a surprisingly visible turning point. You dissolve a small amount of Epsom salt in water and drench the root zone. not every week forever. Not dumped dry onto the soil in random handfuls. Used properly, this is a targeted support tool, not an all-purpose fertilizer. It's there to correct, not replace everything else, and the reason this one feels fast when it works is simple. You are not slowly waiting for some buried ingredient to decompose. You are giving the plant a soluble form it can access more quickly. That's why gardeners often notice the difference first in the color and confidence of new growth. But I want to emphasize something here. If your clematis is yellowing because of waterlogging, root damage, iron lockout, or general decline, Epsom salt will not be some universal magic wand. It works best when the plant is actually short on magnesium or showing symptoms that line up with it. Used that way, it can be a very useful part of the comeback process. Now, if we stopped there, you'd already have a strong recovery plan. But the next one is where we start stacking nutrition with biological activity. And this is one of my favorite low-cost tricks for gardeners who want fast usefulness out of kitchen waste. Fertilizer number 5 is a banana peel and molasses soak. A lot of people know banana peels are associated with potassium, but most people use them in the slowest way possible. They bury them whole near a plant and hope for the best. Eventually they break down, yes. But if your clematis needs support now, eventually is not the timeline you want. So instead of burying them and waiting forever, you speed the process up. Take a few banana peels, chop them up, place them in a jar or bucket, add water, and mix in a little unsulfured molasses. Then let it sit for a few days. The molasses acts like a quick food source for microbes. That means the breakdown process becomes more active, and the soak becomes more than just banana water. You end up with a more biologically lively liquid that can be diluted and used around the root zone. Why does this matter? Because recovery isn't just about feeding the plant directly. It's also about improving the life and function of the soil around the roots. A clematis coming back from stress benefits from both. It benefits from available nutrition, and it benefits from a healthier underground environment. This is also the kind of fertilizer gardeners love because it turns scraps into something useful. But beyond that, it fits the psychology of this kind of rescue perfectly. It's immediate, it's doable, it feels like action. And when a plant looks half gone, what people need most is a smart first action, not more waiting and guessing. Now I told you the 5th one would be the most interesting, and here it is. This is the one that makes people feel like the plant suddenly decided to live again. Seaweed extract. If the other fertilizers on this list are about feeding, seaweed is about feeding plus signaling, and that difference is huge. Seaweed and kelp extracts are valued not just because they contain trace minerals, but because they also contain compounds associated with plant growth stimulation. That's why so many gardeners notice better root response, stronger recovery after stress, and more energetic regrowth when they use it. With a clematis that is alive but hesitant, alive but slow, alive but sitting there doing almost nothing, seaweed can be exactly the nudge that changes the plant's behavior. Think about it this way. Sometimes a struggling plant doesn't only need building materials. It needs a reason to start building again. Seaweed is often the thing that supplies that push. You mix it according to the label if you're using a bottled liquid extract, and you water it into the root zone. Some gardeners also use it as a very gentle foliar application if the plant still has leaves, but the real magic for a comeback clematis is often at the roots, where new activity begins. And this is why I saved it for last. Because if you've already checked the crown and confirmed the plant is still alive, this is the one that often creates the biggest emotional payoff. This is the fertilizer that makes someone walk past the trellis one morning and say, "Wait a second, were those shoots there yesterday?" That's the moment every gardener wants. Now let me show you how to use these the right way, because what you do next is just as important as what you feed. First, never apply liquid fertilizer to bone-dry soil. If the root zone is dry, water the plant first. Let the soil become evenly moist, then feed. That prevents the roots from getting hit too hard and improves absorption. Second, keep everything focused around the root zone, not directly against the stems. Clematis roots spread outward. Feed where the roots are working, not where the stem happens to enter the soil. Third, don't throw all 5 of these at the plant in one day. That is panic feeding, and panic feeding is one of the fastest ways to create stress instead of recovery. Choose based on what the plant is showing you. If the plant just needs a gentle restart, begin with compost tea. If it has started moving again and you want to support vigor and flowering strength, bring in comfrey tea. If your soil tends acidic and the plant has been underperforming for a long time, use a small amount of clean wood ash carefully. If you're seeing yellowing that suggests magnesium trouble, use Epsom salt as a correction, not a routine habit. If you want a quick homemade liquid support from kitchen waste, use the banana peel and molasses soak. And if the plant is alive but sluggish and you want the best all-around wake up and go response, use seaweed extract. Fourth, remember the old rule that has stayed around for a reason. Clematis likes cool roots and a well-cared-for base. If the roots are baking, drying out, or constantly stressed, your fertilizers have to fight uphill. So mulch the root area. Keep moisture more even. Protect the crown without burying it too deep. Recovery happens faster when the root environment stays stable. And fifth, prune with honesty. Remove what is truly dead. Don't keep hanging on to dry stems out of hope. But also don't confuse dead top growth with a dead plant. Cut back to living tissue where you can find it, and let the plant put its energy where it still has life. Now let me tell you something important. If your clematis has looked terrible for weeks and you're feeling impatient, a plant doesn't go from stress to spectacular in a single afternoon, but it can go from hidden life to visible life, surprisingly fast when the roots are still viable and the conditions improve. That is the window you're working for, not instant perfection. Signs of return: a green bud, a stronger leaf, a new shoot from the crown, better color, better extension growth. That's how a comeback starts. And once that comeback starts, the entire mood changes. Suddenly, the plant you were about to throw away becomes the one you check every morning, the one you protect, the one you root for, the one you tell people about when it finally flowers again. That's why clematis rescues are so satisfying, because they look dramatic. They look hopeless right before they turn around. So here's exactly what I want you to do after this. Go outside and inspect your clematis properly. Don't make the decision from 6 feet away. Get down to the crown, scratch the lower stems, check for buds at the base, move the mulch. Look for firmness, not appearances. If you find life, remove the dead material and choose one fertilizer that matches what your plant most needs right now. If the soil is tired, start with compost tea. If the plant is ready to rebuild strength, use comfrey. If the soil is too sour, correct gently with wood ash. If the leaves are yellowing in that telltale way, use Epsom salt wisely. If you want a quick homemade boost, make the banana and molasses soak. And if you want the strongest all-around wake-up call, reach for seaweed extract. Then give it a little time. Keep the roots cool, keep the moisture steady, and watch closely. Because this is the part most gardeners miss. The comeback usually starts low, not with a dramatic top vine overnight, but with the first small signs near the base. And those signs are everything. One shoot becomes 3, one healthy node becomes a stem, one stem becomes a vine, and one vine becomes flowers again. That is how a dead clematis blooms again. And honestly, once you understand this plant, it stops feeling mysterious. It starts feeling predictable. You stop panicking every time the top looks rough. You stop overreacting. You stop throwing away recoverable vines. You learn to check for life first, feed second, and let the plant do what it already wants to do. Because that is the real lesson here. You are not forcing a miracle. You are creating the conditions for a living plant to use the strength it still has. That's a very different mindset, and it's the mindset that saves plants. So before you give up on that brown vine, remember this. A clematis can look finished long before it actually is. The crown may still be alive. The roots may still be ready. The buds may already be waiting. And the right natural fertilizer, used the right way, can be the thing that turns a quiet survivor into a climbing, blooming comeback. If you've got a clematis that looks half dead right now, don't write it off yet. Check it. Feed it smart. Give it the right support. Because there's a very real chance the plant you were ready to remove is only one good recovery cycle away from becoming one of the best bloomers in your garden again. And when that happens, it always feels a little unbelievable. Not because the plant broke the rules, but because now you finally know them. Revive the roots, wake the crown, feed the comeback, then let it bloom. That's how you bring a dead clematis back to life.